I'm going to share with you a tutorial how I made this cute little felt pennant. And what I have done is created some templates for you to use. I have Darling, Lovely, Brave, and Brave in another font. For this tutorial, I'm going to use the Darling template. And so I'm just going to place my tracing paper on top of my pattern and simply trace with my iron-on pen. And now that I've traced my text, I'm now going to cut my pattern pieces out. Almost any felt will work when you're making your pennant, but my favorite to use is going to be a wool or wool blend. The reason why is because the wool will provide a more quality look, thickness, and less of a stretch. So you can see whenever I'm stretching this, there's a little more resistant to that stretch. And as well, I kind of like the heathered texture to the wool. And then the sheets that you find at most craft stores are going to be a polyester. I'll still use them just for a little of a fun craft. But since they are polyester, they do have a patchy thickness that can sometimes look cheap, and they can stretch too easily too. So if I wanted to, I could easily stretch this apart, which I don't care for. I did use the polyester, just a little craft sheet, as the strip and ties of my last pennant. And this is just a cute little craft I'm having in my home, and I like the color of it, so I used it, which really isn't a problem as long as I'm soft and gentle with it. But because of the thin strip, I could easily give this a real good tug and it stretch, which is not preferred. So you just are going to have to be more gentle with a polyester felt. So now that I have everything traced and my pattern's cut out, I'm going to pin it on my felt to hold it in place while I cut out the pattern. And so I'm taking some sewing pins and I'm going to just pin that pattern onto my felt. Ouchie. Sometimes you'll poke yourself. Also too, I like to take advantage of any straight lines. The nice thing about felt, it's very forgiving, so you're able to cut very easily. So I'm pinning to the edge here, just so now I don't have to cut that straight line. It's already cut for me. And so I'm going to pin that in place and then cut. So now that I cut out my pattern, I'm going to remove the pins, remove my pattern, and now I have the desired size of the pennant that I'm wanting to use for my embroidery. I'm then going to take my tracing paper, which we used earlier for tracing our pattern for the text. I'm going to lay that on top of the pennant to kind of eyeball the placement and the correct fitting. So I'm looking at all angles of my triangle and confirming or ensuring that none of my text is going to run over the edge. So I'm making sure that it's centered and placed how I like it. And I'm going to take my sewing pins and I'm going to add the pins and the tip of the pennant, and then the opposite end as well to hold that in place. I forgot to mention too, whenever you're placing your tracing paper on top of your pennant, you want to ensure that you're placing your tracing paper right side down. So as I have here, you should be able to read your text correctly. So I'm going to then take this to the ironing board, and with the hot dry iron, I'm going to lay the iron here for a couple of seconds and very slowly work my way down the text. As I have the weight of the iron on the end of my text, I'm going to unpin and slowly peel back to confirm that the pattern is snapping onto my felt. And once I have that pressed, I'll then remove and we can begin embroidering. So now that I've ironed my pattern, I've unpinned it and I'm able to see that the pattern transferred beautifully. You can see the D is a little more faded than the rest of the text. And the reason why I think is because I did not shake the pen. Whenever I did draw the D when tracing, it did feel a little dry. So I think that's just why that letter's particular is a little more faded. But now that I have my text transferred, I can begin my stitching and embroidery. So my pennant, I'm using this polyester felt because I like the color of it. So what I'm doing is, instead of using this paper pattern to cut each fourth piece out, I'm going to use the first strip that I cut out as a template for cutting. And the reason why is because when you cut that with the paper, it tends to slide around, or because it's so narrow, it's a little challenging to cut. But if you use the felt as a template for cutting, the felt naturally kind of grabs onto each other, so it's easier to, I don't even have to pin it, so it's easier to kind of hug and hold in place as I use as a template to cut those strips. Now that I have my strip and my tags all cut, I'm gonna sandwich my tags on top of one another, place them at the end of the pendant, and then I'll take my strip and I'm going to sandwich all those pieces together. I'll take a sewing pin and I'm going to pin those, and once I pin these, I'm going to run them through the sewing machine. If you do not have a sewing machine, you can either hand stitch these or glue them. But if you do have a sewing machine, I would suggest using it because it's just so much easier. To start my knot, I'm gonna lay my needle on the end of the thread, and then I'm gonna wrap a couple times. I'll then hold that wrap with my fingertips and push my needle through that wrap, and continue to pull all the way through until the end forms your wanted knot, easiest knot. And so now I'm ready to get started. And what I'm going to do is find a starting point on my pennant. I'm gonna choose here on this end. So for the chain stitch, I'm gonna go back down in that same hole that my thread just came out of. Pull through, and I'm gonna create a loop. I'm gonna hold that loop just to make it a little easier to guide through. I'm then gonna come back up. As I come back up, I'm gonna go through that loop, and I'm going to pull from there. And what that does, it creates a slight chain effect. And then I'm gonna follow through that same process for my whole template, the darling. I'm gonna go back down that same hole, which is in the interior of that loop. Pull that through, and I'm just gonna grab it with my finger just to hold and guide. And then I'm gonna come back up. As I come back up, I'll go back through that loop and pull right back through. Again, go back down the same hole, and then inside your loop, I'm gonna hold that loop with my finger just to help guide. I'll bring my needle back up through, and then go through my last loop and pull through. Sometimes you are gonna get a little tug, it's not gonna come, so before you tug too hard, turn it over, take a look, and majority of the time it's just the threads getting a little twisted on the back side. So now I just kind of gently move the threads around, and that straightens that up. Again, I'm gonna go back down in the same hole, pull through. I'm gonna hold that loop with my finger as a guide and come right back through. Now, depending on where you come back up, whether if it's the closer you are, the tighter your chain stitch will be. The further you are, the longer your chain will be. I like the tighter chain, so I may go back and pull this out because this is kind of an awkward angle with me trying to film it. So I'm kind of peeking over. So I prefer a tighter chain. I think it has a nice, tight, attractive look. But they both turned out nice, so it's your preference. So I'm gonna go back through that loop and pull right through. So I'll follow that all the way down. When you're out of thread on the back side, you can either go through, tie it in a knot, or you could do as you should be doing with embroidery, is that you're going to weave your thread just back and forth on the back side, and that will give you a more cleaner, attractive back side of your pennant. So it's going to be up to you. I'll trim this off, and I think I'm okay with the little knot, so you kind of play with it. But that's it. So I'm going to follow the template, darling, do a chain stitch, and I could add a couple of cute little daisies, or I could leave it basic as so, which I'll probably leave basic, but I'll work on that and I'll show you the finished product. I'm also going to show you, if you wanted to add some daisies, how easy that would be to add those. So I'm just choosing my area where I want to add my daisy. From the back, I go in, and then I'm going to go back down in the same hole, just like I previously did in my chain stitch. I'm going to pull, but not pull all the way through. I'm going to keep that loop, and then I'm going to come back up the distance that I want my petal to be. So maybe about this far. Come back up, and I'm going to go through my loop. I'm going to pull, and then I'll go back down on the other side of that loop right here, and this is going to hold that petal in place. And that'll be my first petal of this daisy. And then I'll work my my petals around. So I'm gonna go back in, keep my loop remaining, come back up through my loop. I'm gonna pull, and then I'm going to go back down on the other side of that loop to secure that petal in place. And then for the center of my daisy, I'm going to come up with my gold, and I'm going to add a French knot. And with the French knot is you're going to place your needle close to your material, and you're just going to, it's a little hard peeking over this camera, you're just going to loop around your needle a few times, and then you're going to go right back in. So you're creating a knot. And you can add some additional French knots. So the more loops around your needle, the larger your knot will be. If you want more a collection of a finer knot, so say maybe you want to do 6 little knots in the center, you can do that. You're gonna wrap your floss around your needle once, go right back down, close to that hole that you came up, and pull right through, and it's going to create that knot. And I'll just add one more. Come up. I'm going to wrap it once and go right back down. And my knots are a little thicker because I'm using all 6 strands of the floss. I did not go down in size. So it's going to get a little more of a thickness. So you can have either just one simple knot in the center for your little daisy, or the collection of the French knots, which is kind of cute. I forgot to say too, this French knot we just did in the center of the daisy is the same way that you can finish off the dot of the eye. So any little dot details, that's a good stitch to do, is the French knot. So I would do that same French knot there, which I did on this piece here.